Chapter 8: Designing and Evaluating Portfolio Assessment in the Classroom. Meet our team: Arlyssa Clavejo, Kris Caga-anan, Aidel Jemino, Renemar Chavez, and Jed Manabilang.
Good day everyone, especially to our subject teacher, Ma'am Charian Hinovia. So for today's video, we will going to discuss our assigned topic, which is all about the designing and evaluating portfolio assessment in the classroom. Okay, before we proceed to the discussion proper, allow me first to read the intended learning outcomes. Okay, at the end of the chapter, the students will be able to first, develop portfolio assessment, and second, evaluate portfolio assessment utilized in the classroom. Chapter 8 describes the processes in planning and implementing portfolio assessment in the classroom. Since you already know the nature of portfolio assessment and its purpose, types, and the other components that was discussed by the previous group, so now at this point, we will going to focus in clarifying the steps in designing and evaluating portfolio assessment as a tool. So throughout the discussion, you will know the general procedure that you may use in crafting and implementing portfolio assessment in the classroom. So what is portfolio development? So what comes into your mind if you hear these terms, portfolio development? Okay, I know that most of the people, if they hear portfolio, there are many different kinds of images that comes into their mind. For example, others may think that compiling their works, their reviews, or any kinds of documents. For teachers, often it contains gathering samples of their lesson plans or documents that may reflect their knowledge and skills. With this portfolio development, this requires the learners to collect and integrate examples of their work and allows the teachers to assess their learners as well. So this portfolio provides multiple ways of assessing students' learning over time. So this assessment tool provides opportunities for both the learners and teachers to better understand the educational process in a wider perspective. Okay, so in designing portfolio assessment, it requires some advanced and careful planning. It begins with the clear ideas about the purpose of the assessment. So in developing portfolio assessment, we have here some steps that we need to know because this will be your guide or direction if you are tasked to make a portfolio assessment. The steps for developing and implementing portfolio assessment are aligned with the teaching and learning assessment to the curriculum and teaching and learning activities as well. Okay, so the first step is we need to identify overall purpose and focus. The design and use of portfolio must begin with a clear description of your purpose and focus. Okay, so in the first part of the portfolio, you can state their short description, a brief description about your purpose of having the portfolio, or you can have their you can also state there who is the main highlight of the focus of the portfolio. Or you can ask yourself these questions: why do I want a portfolio? Or what learning targets and curriculum goals will it serve? So with this, you can clearly identify why you want your students to create a portfolio. Okay, so in the next page, we will see a list of questions on how to prepare and use a portfolio. Okay, these questions I will going to read can be your guide or direction in preparing to use portfolio.
Okay, number 1. Who will construct the portfolio? Number 2. What type of portfolio do you want to use? 3. What are the purposes and objectives of the portfolio? Number 4. What categories of work samples should go into the portfolio? Number 5. What criteria will students or groups use to select their entries? And lastly, who will develop the rubrics to assess and evaluate their portfolios? Is it the faculty, the teachers, and etc.? So these are your guidelines in making or using your portfolio.
Okay, so portfolios is not only used to assess understanding, but are also ideal for assessing product, skill, and reasoning targets. So with extensive self-reflection, critical thinking is an important target. Students also develop metacognitive and decision-making skills. So as with other performance assessments, portfolio generally are not very efficient for assessing knowledge targets, according to Macmillan 2007. So why is that? Why is portfolio not very efficient for assessing knowledge targets? Okay, so the reason behind this is that we have to distinguish between learning targets for individual, for examples, and the content of the portfolio as a whole. So these learning targets that reflects all content tends to be broader and general. The present K-12 curriculum, they provide learning targets which need to be achieved in the form of content and performance standards. So the nature of using portfolio assessment is based from the importance and focus of the learning targets. So it necessitates that the portfolio matches with the learning standards and goals. Slide, we have the example of assessing reading skill performance, which shows the alignment of teaching and learning goals, activities, and assessment tasks, which includes portfolio evidence. In the reading skills performance, we have here the goal, sample classroom activity, portfolio evidence, and the assessment tools.
Okay, so for our first part, we have here the goal, the decode. So it goes with the basic reading skills for beginning or weak readers. So for sample classroom activity, we have to read simple text. And portfolio evidence, word bank. It includes the list of word mastered, selected text I can read, and completed reading task or reading on cassette. And for our assessment tools, we have here the individual progress report, peer compliment, self or peer assessment and checklist, and also rating scales. Next one, your goal is to understand simple text. So it goes with the narratives, expository types. So your sample classroom activity will be read familiar story, practice scanning ads, TV guides, and also identify main points and details in a news report. For our portfolio evidence, we have cassette of story read, and reading strategies, checklist, and also completed reading tasks and corrected task items. For our assessment tools, we have self or peer assessment checklist, and also rating scales and answer key. And the next one, if your goal is appreciate literatures, for example, stories, poems, read in class, for example, understanding characters and them. So your sample classroom activity will be semi-extensive reading activities, just like both guided and independent reading. We have here our portfolio evidence, which is the reading logs, reading journal, book tiles, cassette, and video clips and artworks. For our assessment tools, we should assess them through self or peer assessment checklist. And if your goal is reading for pleasure, extensive reading, so your sample classroom activity will be sustained silent reading in class as well as at home. So your portfolio evidence, a log of books or booklets or reading cards, news articles, and also creative tasks and comment cards. So your assessment tools, teacher's record of students' reading, rating scale, and also relating content, presentation, and language. So if your goal is to use simple information tools or research materials, you should do a sample classroom activity like work with glossary, table of contents, or dictionary, or also search engines, encyclopedias. And your portfolio evidence will be dictionary exercises, alphabetizing, and matching definitions to words, synonyms, antonyms, etc. And also results of search as part of projects plus comment card. And your assessment tools will be assessed through answer key and appropriate information, found and partially found, not found. So that is reading skills performance.
Okay, that's all for the first step. Let's now welcome the next reporter. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kris Caga-anan. I am from BEd second year. And today we will be discussing on how are we going to identify physical structure. But before hopping into our discussion, let us first discuss what is physical structure. So when we say physical structure of a portfolio, this refers to the actual arrangement of work samples, which can be organized according to chronology, subject area, style, or goal area. So once the purpose and target has been clarified, we need to think of the physical structure of a portfolio. I have here some practical questions that we may use or that may affect the successful use of portfolio in our classroom. First, we have what it will look like. Where will the students place the output? What type of container is appropriate? Do they need file folders, clear books, and plastic bins? How are the materials to be organized? Is it categorically, numerically, alphabetically, by subject area, or in other ways? And where can students place or store the portfolios for easy access? So these practical questions may announce during the dissemination of instructions to your students. This may help us, or this may affect the successful use of portfolio in our classroom. Next is determine the appropriate organization and sources of the content. So content of portfolio consists of two. First, we have the student's product and the student's activity record. These two contents provide assessment information to the content and process identified from the different dimensions to be assessed. These natural artifacts, which are derived from the different learning activities. This contributes a lot to have an easier assessment to the both sides, which is the teacher and the students. And the range of sample is extensive and must be determined to some extent by subject matter and instruction. I have here an examples of the artifacts of portfolio by subject areas. First, we have language arts. So, here this includes favorite poems, song, letters, also finished samples of different writing genres. We have persuasive letters, poetry, information, and stories. Finished writings drawn from other subject areas. So other subject areas may be Filipino, English, and others. We have literature extension, scripts for drama, visual art, web, charts, timelines, and murals. We also have this audio tapes of reading. Now, in mathematics, we have solutions to an open-ended question. When we say open-ended question, the question should start with how, why, and what. Next, we have graph, histogram. Next, geometric shapes, examples of perimeter area, and cubic space, and also problem made up by students to display a concept. Next, in science, we have prediction based on prior experience. This happens during the activity experiment of your learners. And then we have data tables, concept maps, drawing to scale. And for the social studies, we have presentation of a view of society. We have written descriptions of different cultures, institutions, and professions. Next is the discussion of equality, justice, democracy, freedom, rights, and other large social concepts. Next is the drawing of artifacts. So I have here some statements that will help us determine and identify the appropriate organization. First, we have the select the organization entries of portfolio that will allow the students to meet up the purpose of the portfolio. So it will depend on your target. If your target is to show the performance product of your students, then you should select the output-oriented task. But if you need to provide feedback to students, you must include the procedure they use in putting together of their report. Include a summary of process as part of the portfolio. While according to Macmillan 2007, he pointed out to use work samples that capitalize on the advantages of portfolio such as flexibility, individuality, and authenticity. Next is the categories or type of entries should consider the content and dimension it will assess, and the minimum and maximum number of entries per category. In that, we will make sure that the entries should fully represent the attainment and growth of learning progress of the students. This will allow the variation so that students can show their individual work. This also often means giving students choices and potentials about what they want. Next one, we have the determine the type of work samples to be included in the portfolio at the same time that instructional materials are developed. It is because product and performance tests that result from instructional activities often provide useful work samples in the portfolio. Here I have a questions that will help us or enlighten us on why do we need to know about the structure of the portfolio. So basically, portfolio is a powerful tool that allows students to see their academic progress. Its primary purpose is to document students' learning on a specific curriculum outcome, and it also shows your skills and knowledge developed over a set of period of time. So that is the part of my report. My co-reporter will continue the topic.
Hi everyone, I am Aidel Jemino and I am from the BE second year. So in this video, I am going to discuss to you about the communicate the results of portfolio evaluation. So the final step in implementing portfolio assessment is to conduct a conference with each student to review its contents, the student's reflections, and assessment of the individual output. Okay, so as a teacher, you must give to your students guidelines for these conferences so that they can prepare some questions ahead of time and allow the students to give their views and insights during the conference. Okay, so as a result, this serves as an avenue to determine the strengths and limitations of portfolio for plan of action formulation. Okay, so the following is a checklist for implementing and using portfolio. So the first one, we have, are students knowledgeable about what a portfolio is and how it will be used? Do students know why portfolios are important? Are the students responsible for or involved in selecting the content? The next is there a sufficient number of work samples but not too many? Is a table of contents included? Are specific self-evaluation questions provided? Is the checklist of contents complete? Are scoring criteria for individualized teacher-written comments provided? And the last one we have, are student-teacher conferences included? So according to Macmillan 2007. So this question can help us as a future teacher that will be the vessel and will be the one to give the instructions to the students. So this can really help us for future purposes, and I hope you have taken notes this because this is very essential for our future professions. Okay, so let's move on to the portfolio evaluation. So but before that, we are going to define first what is portfolio. Okay, so portfolio is all about collecting output or projects from students. Okay, so it is a compilation of materials that exemplifies your beliefs, skills, qualifications, education, training, and experiences. So, portfolio also provides students with the opportunity to select a progression of work to demonstrate knowledge of a topic. Okay, so student evaluation. So, when we say student evaluation, it is the student itself will evaluate their own work to evaluate their own work. So, student evaluation is one of portfolio assessment is allowing the students to revisit, reflect, and evaluate their own work. So this allows them to practice critiquing and conceptualizing the quality of their work based on the criteria performance. Okay, so once the students understand the process and the principle of evaluating, they can start to engage with their own reflection and establish a comfortable, confident, and reliable analysis and critique of their own work. So some questions can be asked to facilitate reflection for individuals' work. Okay, so as a teacher or teacher as a model should be the first person to demonstrate the skills in evaluating, critiquing portfolio. So these questions will serve as a guide for students to reflect their own work. So there some questions can be asked to facilitate student reflections for individuals' works, which give insights into how students have been reaching the learning targets. So the first we have, why did you select this piece of writing? Second one, what did you learn from the selection? The third one, can you identify your strengths and weaknesses? And the fourth one, we have, what problems have you encountered in doing the task? The next one, which is the most satisfying experience? The next one, what are your insights after reading the poem? And is this your best work? And the last one, we have, what kind of work would you like to do in the future? So again, these questions will serve as a guide for students to reflect their own work. So now I am going the floor to the next reporter. So thank you for listening.
So good afternoon everyone. I am Renemar Chavez, the next reporter for step for developing portfolio assessment. So the next step for developing portfolio assessment is determine student reflection guidelines. Before implementing your portfolio assessment plan, establish guidelines to help students self-reflect along the way. With this, students will develop greater ownership of the process and will have experience in working collaboratively with you as their teacher. So by determining students' reflection, you can ask some question which is related to their activity, just like which step really helped you complete the activity, which one were less useful, what would you change next time, what personal strengths did you notice in completing today, and what weakness did you find in your effort to complete your work. So through questioning, the students can reflect their activities because you ask some questions that related to their activity, and the students can reflect their own work. So after questioning from your students, you can determine students' reflection because of their answers based on your questions. So next step for developing portfolio assessment is identify and evaluate the scoring criteria. After determining the student reflection guidelines, the next step is to establish the scoring criteria you will use in evaluating student performance. By working on the student criteria, students will develop greater ownership of the process and will have experience in working cooperatively and collaboratively with you as a teacher. So as a facilitator of learning, we are responsible to ensure the reliability and high quality of scoring criteria. The student should be informed also on how he or she will evaluate their portfolios. This can be done by sharing the scoring criteria with your students so that you can ask questions, give their suggestions, and insights. So here is the example of one problem solving portfolios rating form. So as a teacher, you have to evaluate the work of your students properly and fairly. If these content categories are present in their activity, and if all content strategies are present, you have to evaluate it based on what scores you have to give in each content strategies. And that's all for my report.
Teacher evaluation. Evaluating a portfolio involves making judgment about students' outputs. The teacher can use numerical scores to summarize judgment or qualitative system. So, kagaya ng sinasabi dito, ang mga guro ay kailangan mag-evaluate ng mga gawa o mga portfolio ng mga kanilang mag-aaral. Gumagamit din dapat ang mga guro ng mga numerical scores or numbers para magbigay ng mga puntos sa mga ipinapasa ng mga bata o mga mag-aaral na mga portfolio outputs. Scoring needs to be reliable and should not be affected by inconsistencies not related to the qualities being judged. Ang pagpupuntos dito ay sinasabi na dapat daw reliable, dili daw magdalang effects sa mga inconsistencies nga gipakita sa mga bata through sa kanilang portfolio nga nakita sa mga teachers. As a rule of thumb, it is important to remember that the purpose of portfolio is to assess the student outcomes of the instructional goals. Kini is the meaning ani is to makita o ma-remember sa mga teachers, ma-remember po sa mga bata nga ang gamit sa portfolio na ilang ipasa is to makita kung unsay ilahang na-achieve sa ilang learning outcomes base sa gihatag ng mga instructional goals sa teacher. Sample of interest are indicators whether students have achieved the goals of instruction which are involved or evaluate based on the portfolio's entire content, instructors, and individual interests. So, the sample ani is ka na mga indicators, especially magbuhat kag mga lesson plan na agad ni mga indicators. If ever makita ni mo nga isa sa indicators is na-achieve sa mga bata through sa imong lesson, dako na siyang achievement nimo as a teacher. Kaya na-achieve nila ang ilang portfolio nga ang mga content nga nasa ilang portfolio, ang structure o mga entries via individual students. In the most of the classrooms sa loob ng paaralan, ang guro ay nagsisilbing mag-observe po ng teacher o mo-rate po sila sa performance sa mga bata kung unsay na-achieve sa mga bata via sa ilang lessons. If there are some important instructional decisions to be made, additional raters must be considered in order to make scoring more fair. So meaning, kapag may mga importanteng mga bagay na kinahanglan yun buhaton, diha pag yun mo hatag o mo magpangita or mo add og mga additional raters ang mga teachers para makuha nila ang score nga fair o walay laing mga maka-affect via scoring. Student-teacher conference. As mentioned in the steps in developing portfolio assessment, the final step is to conduct a conference with each student to review the contents, reflections, and evaluation. Kagaya ng sinasabi rito na the final step is to conduct a conference with each student to review the content. As a teacher, kinahanglan po nimo as a teacher is mag-conduct kag one-on-one or face-to-face via isa ka estudyante. Tawagon nimo nga mo-conduct mo conference kamong duhara para makabalo sila ilang mga kulang, unsay ilang mga wala na-achieve sa ilahang instructional goals, unsay wala nila nakuha via reflections nila o wala nila na-cope up nga evaluation. It should be scheduled throughout the year which provide important link between the students and teachers. Your students can be responsible for conducting a conference and this will serve as a motivation force for the learner to produce excellent portfolio in the future. So meaning, throughout the year, mag-conduct yun na isa ka student and teacher conference para makabalong mga students kung unsa ilahang mga kinahanglan ni improve or kinahanglan pa nilang ma-achieve. Ang student yun makabalo kung sila responsible sa pagkandak ng conference. Kanisan nga conference is mag-serve as motivation sa ilaha para makuha nila nga kani na-achieve na nako ni, kani is nakuha na nako ni. And effective learners sila para makabuhat sila nindot nga portfolio nga ilang mabutang in the future. According to Macmillan 27, pointed out that students need to compare their reflection with evaluation and make plans for subsequent works. So giingon rin ni Macmillan pointed out that student needs to compare their reflections with evaluations and make plans to subsequent works. Ang students is need po mo compare sa ilahang works sa kauban nilang estudyante sad para makabalo sila kung unsa kay kulang sa kuang unsa kay kulang sa kuang portfolio para inig ka-evaluate ni ma'am ni sir or inig ka-evaluate sa teacher is masakto na ni siya. All the weaknesses and areas for improvement need to be covered. Emphasize student progress and achievement as well. So, digid maligayan sa usa ka bata, hindi mawawala sa isang bata nga mayroon siyang mga weaknesses or kinahanglan pa niyang i-improve. So, as a teacher, you need to be covered that and emphasize student progress para ma-achieve nila ang ilahang goal sa kinabuhi or sa ilahang portfolio. One way or another, this also provides an excellent meaning of communicating with parents. The work outputs and reflection of the students can be sort of windows into what is happening within the classroom as parents see the different aspect of their children's experience in the school. As a tripartite communication between the parents, teacher, and student portfolio assessment provides framework for meaningful three-way discussion of the progress, achievement, and limitation. So this means ng student is kinahanglan po na sila communication with the parents nila para makabalo ilang parents kung sa ilang performance, kung sa ilang na-achieve through learning. So this is appeal po kinahanglan dari ang teachers para po makabalo ang mga magulang, ang mga anak na unsa ilang kinahanglan i-improve sa ilang mga anak, ano ang kailangan pang i-improve ng kanilang mga anak sa kanilang performance, sa kanilang mga assessment na hindi nila na-achieve at magkaroon ng mga limitasyon sa kanilang performance sa loob ng paaralan. After the portfolios are complete, it is a good idea to have an exhibition of portfolios or students lead parent-teachers conference in which student presents their portfolios to their parents. So meaning, after na mag-complete ng portfolios, nindot nga idea is na ay student parent teachers conference, which is ang mga parents makabalo sa performance silang mga anak o kinahanglan po nga makabalo ang student sa wala nila na-achieve. In this case, ang parents makabalo sila, aware sila sa performance silang mga anak nga ilang ipa-eskwela o kung saan na-achieve silang mga anak sa ilahang learning system. In which students present their portfolios to their parents. After this, makabalo na ang mga bata kung asa sila nagkulang, unsa ilang mga wala na cope up, wala na achieve silang mga assessment. They need to present their portfolios or doon para ilang mga parents po is makabalo sa mga kulang silang mga anak, wala na achieve silang mga anak via learning o makomplete nila ilang mga portfolio in the future. So, that's all for my part in the report. Thank you for listening.